Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scaleups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And on today's show, we have a fractional CXO named McEvily. And I know I mispronounced that. I apologize. Soft E. I keep wanting to make it a hard E, but it's not going to be a thing. So tell us a little bit more about you, Nick. Why are you on the show, and what do you want to cover?
Don't worry about the name thing. Most people call me McEvily on podcasts. Don't worry. It's good to be here, Jerry. I want to tell you a little bit about my journey to fractional executive work and my current role as a chief product officer, CPO. And I know P can mean many things, chief people officer. So the acronyms are getting out of hand, but my focus is on product, and I'd love to share a little bit about how I kind of arrived there and why it's working so well for me.
Awesome. And I'll tell you, you're right. It's interesting. You mentioned chief people officer, or you also have CHRO. I think that the C-suite has gotten fairly bloated.
I agree. And my title is actually one of the contributors to that problem. I think that's CPO is a new function after software became a lot more popular in the early 2000s. And it's quickly become a really important role for software companies, B2B, B2C, SaaS, etc. And my journey was kind of unique to this role. And I think most people in the product world, it is unique because there aren't any degrees that allow you to study product management necessarily, unless you're thinking about boot camps and stuff.
Before we dig into that, we were talking before we started the show for the audience about the rise of fractional roles. And it's interesting because taking a step back, and this is a generalization for simplicity, small firms, startups, typically few people, everybody wears multiple hats, everyone does multiple things. Then as the organization grows and comes by necessity more sophisticated, people's job descriptions become very specific, and the need for leaders in those roles grows. But there's a gap, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but there tends to be a gap somewhere between that 5-person, 1 pizza company and what Amazon became, where that fractional person really fills a vital role.
I completely agree, because most of the folks that fulfill that fractional function have had all of those roles. And I can speak for myself. Being a founder, I held multiple hats, and that's how I found my way here, actually. So I was hired at a company as a product manager, and then was asked to be a co-founder. And over the course of the following 4 years, was at the helm of 4 different pivots. And I really became obsessed with this 0 to 1 moment and how my background in design can be applied. And so we did a lot of user testing, a lot of interface design, prototypes, etc., where design is really important. But then there's also the other component around the go, no-go decision and where to invest money, and managing the product into code and beyond. That isn't necessarily covered in the design world, but it was a hat I nonetheless needed to wear. And since then have started a few more companies, and now find myself in a fractional position for product teams, taking them from the point where you were just talking about 5 folks to 20 plus. And I'll shed my roles over those months and years, starting off oftentimes as a product manager or a UX designer, maybe doing some customer research, and then moving forward into hiring the team, creating protocols for the team, processes, and working myself out of a job, and sometimes taking some equity in the process so that I can join my companies in the upside.
Let me ask you, Nick, at what point does a company, I'm going to make an assumption it's a software company of some kind if you're getting involved, but at what point does a company need a CPO? Where do they mature past the point where it can be a nebulous role and get to a point where you would get involved?
I would say after Series A, to use one metric. Another metric would maybe be after 5, 10 developers, 2 or 3 product managers, a CPO or a head of product is crucial. Once you get into Series B, beyond, teams of developers, different product lines, a CPO is essential. But early on, that role looks like a product manager usually, or a product designer with some extra chops. But oftentimes these things are separate. And one of the things that I feel really lucky to have is both of those skills. And so I can come in at the founder level or CEO, I'm joining the CEO and founders to figure out where the leading indicators of market fit are before they get into needing to hire the first product manager, first UX designer full time, so on and so forth. But each of these roles, I have to say, and I don't know if this is something you've noticed as well, Jerry, is you can get all of these roles part-time very fast and at a pretty high quality. And so the hiring landscape and the chemistry that's needed early on has really been shrunk and consolidated to leadership. And then leadership hires out contractors to get everything done. And so I'm especially dangerous with that. And I know that that's how many of my peers and co-founders are working things. They're using outsourced teams in contractor roles for years until they start bringing on a sizable number of full-time staff.
It's interesting you say that. I've been in the direct hire, contracting, consulting, and fractional space for, a long time now. And for many people, they have a difficult time parsing the differences when each of those individual things is the right answer for their org. When do I bring in a permanent person? When do I bring in a contractor? How is a contractor different from a consultant? What guidance would you give them in that regard? I certainly have opinions, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I know you've. Yeah, and I'd love to hear yours after I share. I think the above listed 1099 W-2 mix is really split into 2 levers: the length of time that person is with you and a member of your team, either part-time or full-time, and the level of depth and involvement that they have on a day-to-day basis. So consultants are kind of in that lower quadrant, shortest amount of time, shortest depth and involvement in the company. And obviously full-time is in the top right quadrant if we're imagining this. And I think fractional is actually further up towards full-time than most people think. It's not a contractor. It's not a consultant. They're there with you for 6, 12, 18 months, but just on a shorter weekly time commitment. And oftentimes that's exactly what you need when you're outsourcing all of the other functions or using contractors or temporary folks for the other functions. Oftentimes I'm only working 10 hours for a client max on a weekly basis. So, but I'm doing that for a year or 2. And it really it's a function that I wish I had when I was first starting my companies, and will probably continue to hold. My favorite that complements my skill set is a chief marketing officer. So any new company I'm starting, I need to find a fractional chief marketing officer to help me come up with core strategy early on, and then figure out how I'm going to allocate resources moving forward.
No, I would agree. It's interesting to me. I've always felt that starting with the most basic permanent hire or contractor, the answer is twofold. Number one, do I have enough work to sustain a person in this role for 2 or more years? If the answer is yes, then it's a perm person. The second thing is institutional knowledge. How important is it to me that they know my team, my way of doing things, my product? If that answer is very high, then you're leading again more towards perm. If you've got someone, the old adage, it takes 20 people to build a road and 1 to maintain it. If you're building something, once it's done, you really don't need those folks. That's a contract answer. I put consultants, fractional folks in a different area. A contractor for me is more of a worker bee role. Hey, Nick, go build this app using this language, using this methodology. That's for a contractor to do. A consultant tends to be more strategic and leadership focused, and may do some hands-on as well, but they're building the thing. But a fractional person, you hit it on the head. going way back into the past 30 years ago when I was a technical recruiter, I always dreaded getting those job requirements from my clients for that person for 15 hours a week. I always told them, I was like, it seems so easy for you, but that's the hardest fill because nobody's going to commit to that. They're going to leave as soon
Right.
as
The
they get
in-betweens.
something easier. But a fractional
Exactly.
person is built for that. They're building a practice
Exactly.
around that.
Exactly. And it can be hard sometimes for all of those folks who are thinking about joining the ranks of fractional executives. You do need to find ways of drumming up new clientele and things. And um, it is the best for both sides, though. Like the dollar spent by the startup gets so much more return than a full-time person because a lot of times there's downtime, they're taking benefits. You're paying into an employee stock option pool, you're paying for insurance, you're giving them paid time off. Like I'm very economical in those regards because I don't have any of those. But I'm with the team as long as a full-time person. So I think it's important to find the right balance, and I'm glad to see that there's more communities of fractional folks for startups and early stage companies to delve into. And I can share one of my favorites is fractionaljobs.com is a great is .com or .co.io. Fractionaljobs.io is huge.
That's awesome. Let me pause you for 1 second, Nick, because you said something
Yeah,
important. I don't want to get lost. Okay.
please do.
So you made the comment, there's a lot of, or there could be a lot of downtime. So by working a limited number of hours, you're able to give them better value for dollar. I
Right.
want to highlight that because as somebody who does a fair amount of executive coaching, we're always training our leaders to focus on what they do better than anybody else and not get sucked down into lower value tasks. With a
Yep.
fractional person, not only are they, by definition of the time they have, focusing on the higher value things, you're not spending a significant amount of money for somebody doing things that somebody who you could pay a lot less could easily do. But, and this is subtle but
100%.
important, you're teaching your executives to stay focused on their lane and what makes them special. And it's so easy when you're going from startup to early stage company to get sucked into the low value things you used to do when it was you and four other people that it just doesn't make sense for you to be doing anymore. And fractional folks really drive that home.
Yeah, and the folks that hire fractional folks have that in mind because they know how many dollars are going out the door when you're doing a more menial task. And so, and then also on top of that, we're leading by example. So as a co C-suite member, when you see another member of your team only focusing on the highest value uh, activities and tasks for the week, you get reminded of that constantly as well, and so you mimic that behavior, and so it has a broader cultural impact, I think, as well. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Completely agree. And that's what I was talking about in that kind of subtle but important showing that it absolutely does make a difference, especially when highlighted in meetings. The other thing that about your background, I think I want to talk about as well, you mentioned CMO, and this is totally unfair. I'm going to do it anyway and acknowledge its unfairness. One of the hardest things about marketing is it's a low barrier of entry job. So we all get those 10 to 15 marketing outreaches per day on LinkedIn that are 350% garbage that give marketers a bad name. And I mention this because when you start a fractional business, if you're a CMO, you're wading through all that garbage to get where you are. It's difficult to show unless you've gotten really good at quantifying your outcomes to show the value you can bring. But when I look at like your background in product, Nick, it's product, 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 product. It's so easy to see that you've got the background necessary for the role. Do you find as a fractional person that companies are expending enough energy to dig into the backgrounds and make sure that this person really can bring the results? Or do you find yourself having to wade through the negativity that I described that you see on the marketing side so often?
There's a lot of friction in the onboarding process for someone like me. I think there's negative brand equity tied up in consultants, folks coming in talking like they know, but they don't really have the experience, and or personally have held the weight of that responsibility and those decisions, and then leaving, and not being there to be held accountable for the decisions that they were recommending. Executive pay being quite high. I think people are like, oh, well, that means I'm going to have to pay you, hundreds of dollars an hour. And I think I've found that most of the folks that I'm partnering with and other fractionals are only charging between $100 and $150 an hour. And so it ends up being really effective in that regard in terms of budget. And of course, due diligence, find some testimonials, talk to some people that they've worked with in the past. I would urge that. And folks like me, product is a little bit hard. When I go from 0 to 1, the metric that I am putting up on the board is 1, right, for each company. And so it's like, did you get to market? Did you get customers? That's my metric. Going from 1 to many, or building your customer, that's a whole separate, it's very similar, but it's a whole separate set of energy, funding, just general team position. And so a lot of folks will be like, hey, can you give me an example of a time when you led a company to millions of users? And I can share those, but those are when I was at the helm. Those are not when, a lot of this relies on the people that I work with and practicing the things that I share. And so it's a little bit harder for me, probably easier for CTOs. CTOs are like, yeah, I built the code worked. Marketers are like, I did 3 campaigns, they got 2,000 new customers from it. And while what I do affects development, sales, marketing, in terms of intelligence and feeding it upstream, I can't be held responsible for those results, unfortunately. So it is a little bit harder to prove my value outside of the years of experience, the money that I've raised, and the people that I've worked with.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And being able to quantify your experience obviously makes it easier, especially in places like tech, where that's how people are wired to think, that engineering mindset. But your background is strong, and I would imagine if you're staying with the types of companies you've had those successes with, must resonate well. So knowing that, how do you pick a customer? I mean, being a fractional CXO, regardless of the discipline, is a two-way street. The client has to like you, but you're obviously not going to put yourself in a position to fail. So how do you make those determinations? What are you looking for?
Entrepreneurship is really emotional. So I think I start oftentimes with the emotional component and the mindset. It's like, if you like to test things, if you like to be proven wrong, if your ego is something that you're aware of and can sit beside, that's my people. And so I'm much more likely to work with those folks. If you're always certain you want to go forward with the product, no matter what signals you're hearing, oftentimes I know that's a recipe for future conflict and disagreement, and I'm tired of having those disagreements. I will say that there is a very important balance between intuition and gut and data. And I'm here, I think, and any good executive should be, helping hold that balance between those two things. If you're only going with intuition, let's add some data to the mix. If you're only using data, we need to find a visionary or someone who has a gut that we can all believe in. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that intuition is far less esoteric than it seems on the surface. I've always felt, especially in more experienced folks, that intuition comes from all of the data that you've absorbed and internalized. You may not be able to articulate the points clearly, but they're there. And that's what feeds you that answer, because you've seen this before, you've heard this song before, you know the words to the song, you know how the song's going to end, and that gives you your answer.
Yeah. Ray Dalio kind of coined a term for me called believability. Mm-hmm. And so intuition to me is kind of in a very similar metric as believability. If your intuition has guided us well in the past, 5, 10, 20 times, I'll trust your intuition. If we're just meeting and we don't have any track record to go on, and you don't have any track record to point me to,
You
your
want
believability
data.
is low.
Yep.
And we want to be leaning more on data in that regard for sure.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Now, going back to the fractional piece, you've got a strong background. Like I said, if you looked at Nick's LinkedIn profile, it's product, 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 product. So you winding up as a chief product officer, probably not a surprise to anybody. But what led you to the path to decide that you wanted to be a CPO and work with other orgs versus either being the CPO of a larger org or another startup for yourself?
I'm going to sound like a capitalist here, I think, Jerry.
Not gonna hurt my feelings.
Um, but personally, the reason why I choose fractional executive work versus full-time executive work um, is to diversify my risk and diversify my upside. So if I'm going to get a full-time job at a company that is Series C, Series B, I'm going to get, let's say in dollars, 6 figures in equity that could grow to more. But if I'm in the CPO role at a seed or Series A company and I leave with 1-2%, that feels like a small token early on and was earned and will hopefully shape upside moving forward beyond. But is a low dollar amount, right? It's like 20 grand, maybe it's 6 figures, depending on the valuation of your company. So I'm not really getting paid that much, but my upside is dramatically higher than it would be if I was working with a Series C or later stage company. And I have now multiple of those types of arrangements with companies. And that really serves me as an investor of my time and knowledge to diversify my knowledge as best I can in the time that I've got. I'm here kind of in the prime of my career. I just had a baby. It's important for me to, be wise with my time. So that's my personal motivation. And I think a lot of people have taken this job for time and flexibility. Like I said, it's really great to be able to have a little bit more control over my time. But there's all downsides for this as well in terms of insecurity, lack of paid time off, benefits. I think, maybe a little bit less stress, but I'd say for me personally, I take on the stress that my founders feel because I've been in their shoes.
Yeah,
So I can't speak
different
for
kind of
all
stress,
fractional
not
executives.
less.
Yeah. So now I've got 5 founders stress or, 3 founders stress at a time instead of just one, which, has a little bit of a downside, but it's a pleasure. I really do love what I do every day. It's great. I get to talk to people's customers. I get to design their products. I get to help them hire their teams. And that's what I found that I'm best at. And I think everybody should be, especially in the CXO role, like you were saying before, it's a tendency to just play to your strengths.
It's interesting because this is my second company, Redbeard Solutions. My first company, Influence Understood. I was a fractional CSO. I helped with go-to-market. I did sales training, recruiter training, leadership training, all that stuff. And I grew more in that 9 years than I did in the 20 before it, because you get exposed to the inner workings of so many different companies. You find out
Right.
what really works and what doesn't. You find out what the
Yeah.
top 10 do differently than the bottom 10 do. It's amazing how much I grew in that time. I can imagine
Amen.
it's the same for you.
It's the same. Yeah. And that's another selfish thing, I suppose, is that it keeps us sharp, right? We get that much more exposure to that many more companies in different verticals. Those strategies can cross pollinate. Someone in healthcare isn't necessarily doing the same thing that another person in publishing is doing, and those two things can really inform each other. So, yeah, I'm really grateful to be in this role, and I'm glad that this is becoming more of a mainstay in the hiring landscape.
I can see why you would say selfish, but I would say it's selfish in the way that putting your gas mask on first before putting in the next person's gas mask is.
Yeah,
Yes, you're making
yeah,
sure you're okay, and you're growing more rapidly than Nick in a company would, but you're also bringing that to all these other companies. They're getting the
yeah,
benefit of that selfishness in a
yeah,
very
yeah. Couldn't
meaningful
agree
way.
more. Agreed.
So I mentioned again, sorry folks, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, but the first fractional person I worked with was a CTO. Now, his structure, this is many moons ago. This is
Yeah, you were
just
saying it was
after,
early 2000s.
yeah, it was just
Yeah.
after the dot-com crash. Email was still the belle of the ball. That was the killer app. But this guy, super smart guy. He had a small company. If memory serves, it was called Geneva Group. His name was Joe Reif, PhD from MIT. What he did a little different than what I've seen others do is he predominantly focused on larger companies, where he would
Hmm.
take more of an interim than a fractional role, but he brought the whole office. So he essentially was billing out his entire team while the company moved. Maybe it was during an acquisition, maybe they'd lost the CTO and needed to get a new one. And if anyone knows anything about C-level searches in large firms, they can take 6 months to a year easily.
Years.
And he
Yes.
would run that. Yeah, gosh, I could tell you stories for hours about it. But anyway, long story short, um, his whole model was go in, stabilize, and keep them steady. Try to avoid making the types of decisions that the new CTO might not like, but keeping the ball rolling while they were doing that search. That was his whole thing. And
Yeah, I
some of
love
his
that.
roles were as short as a month or two. Others were a year long. So it's a little different way of doing things.
Yeah, and I'm actually exploring this in the PE space because PE is now really, I think, growing. Micro PE and mid-sized PE, especially, um, they need interim folks all the time to usher them through these transitions after, et cetera. And even paternity maternity leaves these days. Even early stage companies need interim executives to keep momentum, especially at larger companies that have really generous maternity and paternity leaves. So yeah, I think there's a room, there's a place for this in hiring strategy more broadly. Absolutely.
I think one of the keys is on both sides of the equation, whether you're the company seeking or the individual or company offering the service. I think the key is articulating need and ability to fill. So if I'll steal your example of maternity or paternity. If I know that one of my key executives is going to be out for 3 months, 6 months, whatever the number is, the good thing about maternity and paternity is it doesn't sneak up on you. So you've got time to plan that void, and then having
Yeah,
people that can say, I've done this before and this is how I did it. It feels like a natural way to resolve a problem.
agreed. And I would even say further than that, timing is everything.
Of course.
And so yeah, just maintaining relationships with folks is important because sometimes they don't even know and they might need someone to plug a hole or because hiring, even though there's so many tools to help us these days, it doesn't seem to have gotten any easier or faster, unfortunately.
No.
So yeah, fractional is great in a lot of these ways. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I will say on hiring, quick funny story. Um, if you guys remember back again to the early 2000s, the big player that was going to revolutionize the game was Monster. The Monster board was the first of the really big
Yeah,
job boards. They were
yeah,
running ads on how they were going to kill the staffing industry, and you as a hiring manager would have access to thousands of resumes. While they were running those ads, I was driving to their office to visit my contractors on site at Monster. And every time I heard their ads, I would laugh because I was like, well, I hope it doesn't kill our industry too quick since you use us. So
yeah.
um, they
There's
shall
irony there.
they shall remain nameless, but there's an AI company that is supposed to be taking over staffing now, who I had contractors at. So I kind of chuckled with that one too.
Yeah, it's coming full circle. AI could be a whole other episode for us to
Yeah,
cover,
that
Jerry.
That's a good
How
point.
fake its promises
I
might
could
be
jump
right
on
now.
that tangent for sure. Let me ask you this: one question, then let's wrap things up. Actually, two
Sure.
questions. One will be how can people find you? But before I ask that, how do you differentiate in a crowded space? I mean, again, I before we even spoke, I looked at your background and it's product everywhere, so it's kind of no brainer. But how do you position yourself? How do you reach out so people say, wow, this is a serious player in the game?
It's really just the fact that I'm a founder myself. Um, there are incredible entrepreneurs out there um, who have design and product backgrounds, like Brian Chesky from Airbnb, um, Scott Belsky from Behance, currently at Adobe. So we're putting numbers up. I think our reputation is growing. But designer founders, I think, are one of the most important members to have on your team. Folks with product acumen early, and who have gone through it before. I've raised tens of millions of dollars for companies that I've started or helped raise tens of millions of dollars for other companies, and I understand the stress that keeps founders up at night. To be in venture debt or have equity, shared with a lot of people. They're, employing 10, 20 people and being responsible for their livelihood and their kids' college funds, et cetera. There's a lot of weight in that. And so I don't take any of that lightly. And I think that's the main way that I differentiate myself from other folks who are maybe really great product managers at larger companies like LinkedIn or Coinbase or some of these other larger businesses. But I understand what it's like to be early on, being in the founder's seat, growing a team, finding a rhythm and an engine to maintain product market fit over changing markets and just chemistry internally. So yeah, I think that's my main way to differentiate, but I think other folks do it differently. I think, product marketing is a kind of a sub-segment that's now getting quite a lot of attention. So I think product marketers, and not even maybe being just that you're a product marketing consultant, you have to be in the C-suite or be a good director, but just like having that as a big focus is great. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to differentiate, but that's the way that I think I would say I differentiate myself.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's so many people out there that have an idea or take the idea through ideation and never get customer one, never get employee one. But if you've been through raising, if you've been that far, you're already in a much smaller group. So I think that's a significant differentiator.
Thanks, sir.
No, you're welcome. Awesome. Well, let me ask you this. Go ahead.
Yeah, to answer your last question, where to find me? Is that?
Yes, that's where I was going.
Oh, is that where you're going? Cool. So you can find me at nickmcevily.com. I know it's a mouthful at the end, nickmcevily.com. And same on LinkedIn, just find me over there. That's where I'm spending most of my time sharing my thoughts around product, fractional work, and looking forward to chatting with you all there.
Awesome. And for folks that are in audio only, I'll include those things in the show notes. They'll be in the show notes on the YouTube channel as well, but you'll be able to catch them there, so you can find Nick easily as your next fractional CPO. Nick, I really appreciate you being on. I'd love to have you on again anytime. I thought it was great.
Yeah, likewise, Sherry. Thanks again, man. And looking forward to talking to folks.
You're welcome. Thanks very much, everyone, for giving us a half hour of your very valuable time. Between now and next week, build something awesome and continue to be awesome. Thank you.